Thank you for your attendance, both in person and virtually, at today's seminar titled Crossroads of Democracy, Trade and Investment Implications of the U.S. and Mexico Elections. I am Jose Borjon, a Senior Policy Advisor at Aiken's Public Law and Policy Section based in Washington, D.C. My area of work and expertise center around the U.S. Mexico issues and U.S. Congress. Having been born and raised on the U.S. Mexico border, I have a keen interest in the well being and success of the economies of both countries. Here's a brief overview of today's session. Election years are often marked by uncertainty and the fear of potential change, and the 2024 elections are no exception for both Mexico and the United States. In Mexico, the June elections resulted in a significant victory for the Morena party, which has maintained the presidency since 2018. The election of Claudia Sheinbaum as Mexico's first female president indicates a continuation of the government's focus on social programs and economic reforms. The election of Donald Trump to a second non-consecutive term will without a doubt make trade a center characteristic of his presidency. With a Republican-controlled House and Senate, President Trump could make changes to federal laws, including those associated with trade and investment opportunities, and move towards an America First policy that he has long touted. At present, business leaders and investors are concerned about how changes in the respective administrations could impact existing trade partnerships, supply chains, and economic stability. The election of Donald Trump raises questions about the U.S.'s role in global trade dynamics, including its stance on key issues like globalization and protectionism. This uncertainty complicates decision-making for businesses engaged in cross-border trade as they grapple with potential changes in trade policies that could either foster growth or impose new barriers. In today's discussion, we will address this issue head-on, but first, let me introduce our panelists. Congressman Kevin Brady is a former Republican congressman from Texas. He currently serves as a senior consultant at Aiken. For 26 years, he represented the 8th Congressional District of Texas, anchored right here in Houston. He was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and one of the key architects of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Chairman Brady led the Trade Subcommittee, worked on 13 of the 15 U.S. free trade agreements, including USMCA. He also served as the White House point person for the DR-CAFTA trade agreement. Chairman Brady, thank you for being here with us. Juan Antonio Dorante Sanchez held high-level positions in the Mexican government in the Secretaría de Economía, where he oversaw trade negotiations, as well as served as economic counselor to the Mexican Permanent Mission at the World Trade Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. Additionally, he has served on 4 dispute panels before the WTO. He is a member and past president of the Mexican Association of Intellectual Property and an expert on U.S.-Mexico relations, trade, and commerce. Thank you, Juan Antonio, for being here with us. David Zapata is Vice President of International Affairs and Executive Director of the Mexico Trade and Investment Council for the Texas Association of Business, TAB. Previously, David served as Assistant Secretary of State for Mexican and Border Affairs at the Office of the Texas Secretary of State, where he managed relationships between that office and high-level government officials in Mexico. David, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jose.
We thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedule to join us today. But let's get right into it. And the way we'll do this is it'll be a panel. I'll ask a question and it'll either be directed at one particular person or all 3 of them can engage and we can go back and forth. So I'll start by saying, according to the U.S. Department of State, Mexico is one of the United States' closest and most valued partners, sharing a 2,000-mile border with 47 active land ports of entry and history that has deep cultural and people-to-people ties and a more than 200-year relationship. The first question, for whoever wants to answer it, where do you see the issue of trade in regard to the U.S.-Mexico relation given a Trump presidency and a Sheinbaum presidency? Who wants to answer this first? Don't all jump in at once. Congressman?
honor to kick off. And one, thank you for having me on the panel, and it's an honor to be here. So there's no question, the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. is crucially important. I would argue even more so for my home state of Texas. We know that those economic, cultural relationships are so key. The question is, how does President Trump, in his second term, view that relationship? How is he going to react? And as importantly, how do we try to get out ahead of those actions and make it work to preserve, if not grow, our economic relationship? So I think a good way to start would be to think about the lens that President Trump views Mexico. So for the past 40 years, I think it's clear his view on trade is shaped mainly by trade deficits and unfair trade practices. And he views free trade agreements as being negative for the U.S., and most economists and many of us in the business community see them as strongly positive. But I think now, I think the lens the incoming administration sees Mexico falls in two areas. One is, in their view, they look at the Mexico relationship as having four strikes against it. The first is the border and migration, something President Trump cares about deeply, and which has surfaced as a major political issue in Congress. Secondly is China, primarily transshipments, or the concerns about future transshipments through Mexico. A third is essentially the trade deficit. I think it irritates the president that autos and vehicles and parts are made in Mexico rather than the U.S. So he sees the trade deficit as a concern. And the fourth is the USMCA, which he took pride in renegotiating. Feels like it was a strong modernization and a rebalancing of trade with the U.S., but feels like the past administration in Mexico, took U-turns on some key commitments like energy, ag biotech, all of that. So I think the incoming administration sees those four areas as the biggest concerns with Mexico, all of which they intend to act on. The other lens to think about is timing. So if you look at the incoming administration, in-house Republicans, they share one belief, which is in the first administration, they feel like they squandered the first 6 or 7 months of the administration on the repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act, when so much more could have been done in that same time period. And so they are determined not to repeat that mistake. And so there is an urgency to all of these actions. And I think you see this in their appointment of personnel at the cabinet level who can best move an agenda forward in a short timetable. They believe they have 2 years to dramatically reshape the U.S. government and its standing after the midterm elections. Majorities can change, and while they may still have executive orders and regulatory initiatives, those can be reversed. And so there is an unusual urgency, I think, in the incoming Biden or Trump administration that really is shaping not just who they're choosing in their cabinet and personnel, but the timing of all these issues.
And let me ask this some question for Juan Antonio. How do you see a Sheinbaum presidency when in regards to trade issues?
So thank you. First of all, thank you to Aiken for having me today, and it's an honor to be with my fellow co-panelists. So I would say that as we explained many times, what we are looking at in Mexico's government is ambiguity and duality. On the one hand, we can see that they are continuing, the government of Claudia Sheinbaum has continued to implement and even go beyond what López Obrador proposed at a certain point as constitutional reforms, many of them motivated by ideological grounds and not having really justification or assessments to being implemented. We talked yesterday, for instance, of the judicial reform, where no studies, no analysis whatsoever supported this idea of amend the Constitution. And some of those amendments are actually against at least the spirit or the letter of the USMCA. The disappearance of constitutional autonomous bodies, it's actually against USMCA, explicit or implicitly. Some of the proposed amendments to ban, for instance, GMO corn, the proposed amendments to the Constitution on energy. So those things are moving the government into a direction where you think, well, they are not thinking on USMCA. But on the other hand, I think that most of the economic cabinet of Ms. Sheinbaum has actually proposed and issue a speech where they support trade, and they have been very, very insistent in the fact that Mexico wants the USMCA to continue to be reinforced and actually improved, and that they are welcoming foreign investment. They are actually ready to get on board of the nearshoring phenomena. And so what you can see is that there is this ambiguity in the signals that they are sending. I think that Mexico is ready to engage every time more, and especially after Mr. Trump's statements, on a very significant review of USMCA. Of course, Mexico doesn't want the USMCA to be reopened. I think that's not the preference, but they will have to be ready for a reopening, a renegotiation of certain aspects. And I think that they are signaling somehow that everything that everything in Mr. Trump's threatens and attempts to actually get leverage for this negotiation, everything that he's putting forward can be dealt with within the 2026 review of the agreement. So I think that, and I should have started with saying that USMCA, it's working, and that's true for the Mexican government. We received last year 36 billion of foreign direct investment from the US. Mexico is the US first trading partner. The US is Mexico's first trading partner also. Canada is also playing a game there. If you look at the numbers, USMCA is working. And of course, the government of Mexico, even with these political ideas or political trends, it's really sure that they need and they want to keep USMCA.
Thank you. David, do you have anything else to add? Anything you would like to share?
Yeah, again, first of all, thank you, Ekin, thank you, Jose, for having us. And it's such an honor to be here in this panel with such distinguished panelists next on both sides. I guess I agree with a lot of what both of my fellow panelists have said, but just to provide a little bit of a Texas-centric perspective on these issues, you mentioned the importance of the U.S.-Mexico relationship. I'll highlight even more than that, the importance of the Texas-Mexico relationship. Out of those almost 100 billion between the U.S. and Mexico, 272 is just between Texas and Mexico. Then California and Michigan are the second and third largest trade partners for Mexico within American states. And Texas almost triple the second one, even California. So a lot of people may not be aware of that. So we are very highly interconnected. When I say the Texas-Mexico region, obviously I mean the country, but also specifically our border Mexican states, Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo León, Tamaulipas. Out of those 4 Mexican states, they are some of the, depending on which data point you look at, they are the top 4, top 5 exporters of goods into the U.S., a lot of it into the automotive sector. So we have benefited a lot from the USMCA as and again, just to highlight the point of the USMCA is working. It's working greatly. Again, China used to be our top trading partner, and over the last few years, Mexico and Canada have been our first and second trading partners. So we want to keep seeing that. I think we Americans, Texans prefer to see Mexico and Canada as our top trading partners over China for a lot of security-related reasons. So again, Texas benefits a lot from trade with Mexico, obviously, and I think that the USMCA is a great factor of that, and we will be trying to play a constructive role as we move forward in the conversations between the Trump administration and the Sheinbaum administration as they begin to talk to each other. And we want to be as a chamber. By the way, sorry, I wanted to say I wanted to make the point that Texas Association of Business, where our name can be a little confusing. We're basically the state chamber of commerce, so we represent all of the private sector in the state, as well as partnering with all of the other chambers across the state. So we have we feel that we have a pretty good representation of views from the private sector in Texas.
And just to kind of, because, this conversation is more political in nature, and I just thought about this question. I should have asked it first, and I'm sorry I didn't. Were any of y'all surprised by the results of the election in either the United States or in Mexico? Who wants to go first? Juan Antonio.
Perhaps me. So, everybody knew that Claudia Sheinbaum was, basically leading the polls, and that she would win probably in Mexico. Some of us had the idea that perhaps Xochitl Galvez would actually overcome that advantage that Claudia Sheinbaum had during the whole election process. What we didn't know is that she would win with so much power,
59%.
59%, and that she will get a qualified majority in the Chamber of Representatives and almost qualified majority in the Senate. That, after all, they got convincing some senators to move to Morena.
2 or 3, right?
2 or 3. Yeah, they changed their hats, and then they became part of the electoral force or the voting force of Morena in the Congress. So she actually has more power than what López Obrador had when he took office. No? Also, now Morena governs 22 states. No? Out of the 32, 22 are governed by Morena governors. And so I think that was a surprise for many people in Mexico. And actually, when López Obrador put forward 18 proposed amendments to the Constitution back in February, he said, well, I'm going to put them, even if I don't have the qualified majority right now, for the new Congress in June to be able to approve them. So for many people, that was a nightmare that became true. No? And that's the situation right now. Now, on the other side, on the US side, at least from a Mexican perspective, we were actually at certain point not sure that Trump's advantage will remain there when Kamala Harris was appointed as candidate. We knew that both candidates will be difficult to manage, let's put it that way, in a context of a review of the 2026, of the USMCA in 2026. But we thought, and I think that was a general feeling, that Kamala Harris would be actually less contentious, let's say, or more cooperative in a context of a 2026 review. We knew that she voted against the USMCA when this was approved, but after all, when she was during the campaign, she never mentioned that she wanted to cancel or to withdraw from the agreement. So Kamala was, in a way, more comfortable for many Mexicans to become to be the president. Now, when Trump won, I don't think that was a surprise. The surprise is that so early he's actually using the strategy to threaten by imposing, for instance, tariffs against Mexican imports. And more surprising, I would say, is what Canada is doing. So we tend to forget Canada in this formula, and for us, it has been really surprising that first the governor of Ontario, the largest province in Canada, and then the governor of Manitoba, they basically said, let's kick out Mexico from the agreement. Then Justin Trudeau and Minister Freeland were actually saying, well, we're concerned about China and how Mexico is relating, is dealing with the issue. And so we think that perhaps Canada, because of that's the other point. Canada will hold elections next year, and USMCA is becoming a part of the narrative of the candidate. So that's something that it's a surprise also, and we'll see what happens in the elections there in Canada, and how they accommodate with the review, because the new government will be the one in charge of the 2026 review, not this one. I would say that.
Thank you, Juan Antonio. David, any comments on surprise on either Sheinbaum's election or President Trump's election, or reaction to that?
Yeah, before I answer that, I'll say that we are a bipartisan chamber, so we gladly work with both sides of the political spectrum, but just as observations of what happened after election day. We're in Texas, so we were not as surprised, perhaps, of election results. Some trends that we saw that seemed to signal, not that it was a given, but it seemed to signal a win for President Trump. The approval ratings, for example, stuff like that. I think that in Texas, it's important to highlight the move of different demographic groups towards Republicans at a state level that was significant, at least for our own state.
The Latino
vote, for example, exactly. I mean, I think at a state level, if I remember correctly, it was at 45% or so. So that's a significant change. So observing those changes, we want to make sure that we understanding what they may mean, what they may translate into, especially as we lead into a legislative session next month, next January. Great.
Next year.
Next year. So I think what those demographic changes, do they translate into a policy preference change as well during session? So obviously, as a chamber, we are very pay attention to what's going to be going on in the legislature, and trying to support the interest of the chamber. On the Mexican side, Morena had such a significant advantage that I don't think it was quite a surprise. I think we, from a chamber and a structural perspective, we are glad that we still have some people that we know, that we have been working with over the last continuity, exactly, so that we are able to, Roberto Velasco, Secretary Ebrard, a few others, that we are able to continue that relationship to pursue a closer connection to President Sheinbaum.
Chairman Brady.
I'll be very brief. Yeah, so it was surprising. The strength of the Trump win was surprising in the counties across America that saw movement. 90% of them moved Republican, some of them strongly so. Here in Texas, President Trump won 18 of the 20 border counties,
Yes, sir.
Some of which hadn't voted Republican.
Over close to 100 years.
Yeah, which is quite a while.
Yes.
And we saw, I think in Texas, several candidates move above 50%, almost 56% of support among Texas Hispanics. And I think driven mainly by the economy and by the border issues, which is, two political issues that drove his victory in a big way, and two which he's going to deal with in a big way, all of which affects our relationship economically with Mexico.
Thank you. According to the U.S. Department of State, Mexico was the United States' top goods trading partner in 2023, with total two-way good trade at $807 billion, surpassing China. Our countries rely on closely integrated supply chains to power our economies and strengthen our global competitiveness. U.S. exports supported an estimated 1.1 million jobs in 2019. With these figures in mind, last week, President Trump issued a stern warning to Mexico and Canada regarding migration issues and drug issues that have long plagued the United States. He threatened to impose a 25% tariff on all imports from those countries. We saw that Mexican President Sheinbaum responded immediately and said Mexico would also impose tariffs on U.S. goods entering her country. And Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada said the Canadian border cannot be compared to the Mexican border. What do you think will happen? Will this create a trade war amongst the three countries? Can this situation be contained, or is President Trump bluffing in order to accomplish his intended outcome? Whoever wants to go first.
All right. So again, I think that if you look at history, I would say my personal opinion is that Trump is creating a moment of disturbance in the region, so that he can have a better position when he takes office to advance on these issues as soon as possible. I mean, immigration, fentanyl, and China. No? Those three elements, I think I share with the chairman, that those are the things that he wants to solve very quickly, and he wants to give some sort of an outcome on result as quick as possible. So I do think that he's threatening at this point to get an advantage in the position of negotiation. How ready he will be to do it? I think one consideration is, and yesterday we were talking about that, what would be the vehicle to do that? And how does that relate to the other countries? I know I don't mean Mexico and Canada, but if you impose 25% of tariffs to Mexico and Canada, will you allow the rest of the world to get the WTO, MFN tariffs to their imports to the US? And if that happens, then you will be favoring countries that doesn't have an FTA with the US. No? That would be the first question. So I think that's an important element to wait when considering whether these tariffs will be applicable. The second is the implications for inflation in the US. For instance, I'm going to give you an example. 25% increase in costs for US consumers on imports like automotive goods will hit the first to General Motors and Ford, and then Stellantis. No? So those three will be the companies affected immediately. The average price of pickups will raise around $3,000 per unit. And then that will imply probably some losses in the job site, in the working force. So how long will the US, if we will come to a scenario of these 25% tariffs, will support or will keep these tariffs? That's another point. So I do think that there is chances for that to happen. I don't know also if it will start with 25, maybe he starts with 5, then goes to 10, and so on and so forth. But I think that for now, I would say it's just a negotiating position.
Chairman Brady, and then we'll let David go.
So is a trade war possible? The answer is yes. President Trump feels like he has nothing to lose in this second and last term. Feels like the public is strongly supportive of border security and returning dangerous migrants to their home countries. And as we saw with steel and aluminum tariffs, he's not afraid to apply those tariffs even to our closest neighboring, strongest trade allies. I know from the Ways and Means Committee took a concerted effort by a lot of members of Congress and the business community to exempt Canada and Mexico from those initial tariffs and trade exclusion processes there. So yes, it is possible, and he's deadly serious about this. So what could moderate that? I think two things. One is within the White House itself. You know, what I noticed in the White House on trade issues was that President Trump, creates a team of rivals. You've probably read this. He likes to have. He's not going to read 100 pages of briefing material, but he listens incredibly well, and he puts people in a room who are going to debate these issues, and he's listening incredibly closely to this. And so I think most believe that his cabinet picks have created another team of rivals with obviously Secretary of Commerce Lutnick, Mr. Greer over at USTR, Peter Navarro in whatever role he plays, and Ambassador Lighthizer, who I think will continue to play a key role as being very aggressive on the tariff front. But I think Secretary Bessent and Kevin Hassett will play a balanced role there. in those conversations. I would say the free trade side has got an uphill battle there, but I think you'll see that team of rivals discussions because that's how he likes to weigh these issues. The other determiner here in moderation is Congress itself. One thing you need to understand about this president is that he doesn't engage with Congress in a traditional way. He will talk to dozens of members of Congress every day, some of them multiple times. This is very unusual for a president. Usually it's a regularly scheduled outreach, to members of both parties, even when you have a Governor Bush from Texas, who I served with in the legislature, there are, these regular outreaches, not with this president. And he'll call you, I can tell you from experience, at midnight, night after night, if he's got an issue on his mind. So Congress plays a big role here, not in a formal way, but an informal way, in the sense that, one, there are a number of members of Congress representing states and regions where this trade relationship with Mexico and Canada is incredibly important. Secondly, it depends on the engagement of the business and ag community, in these key states, because that played a role successfully, I think, in the first administration. And also, I think one of the key determiners here is the congressional districts in states most likely to be retaliated against. Clearly, he understands it's not enough to just buy American, you have to sell American, and retaliation reduces our ability to sell made in America manufacturing, farm goods, technical issues or services. And so he will hear from, to the degree he hears from members of Congress and the Senate in those industries and regions that are most likely to be harshly retaliated against. I think that too can help moderate sort of the decision making there. But he is, if nothing else, unpredictable on trade, deadly serious about accomplishing border security and a strong economy, making more here. So yeah, it is a possibility.
David, thank you so much.
I'll be quick. So I think that Texas is at the epicenter of those two situations: the immigration challenges and the fentanyl crisis. I think that in a way, I'm glad to see the three governments coming together and trying to address those issues. For the chamber committee, it's definitely concerning, though, that the way that's the tool that's being used to leverage that is the use of tariffs. That's definitely something of tariffs can be extremely disruptive to the supply chain that already connects the three countries, and specifically Texas and Mexico. A lot of the companies that you mentioned in Mexico that provide for the US are based in one of our 4 border Mexican states that connect with Texas, and they come to Texas, companies that provide jobs. So any potential use of tariffs can be a great concern for Texans, for the business community as well. I think that the general consensus is that it is the first volley, perhaps, trying to bring everyone to the table. We'll see what happens. But as we move forward in these conversations, as the chairman said, and more than I agree, we want to be engaged, and our Texas congressional delegation fully voted for the USMCA. So thank you for that, Chairman.
I think that was the first time we had all members of the delegation vote for a trade agreement. And we appreciate the leadership role TAB played in that.
Thanks. So we know that we will have good partners in trying to present a pro-business message to all the stakeholders when we get there, if we get there.
Chairman Brady, you kind of sort of highlighted on this, but I want to ask the question. This one is particular for you. What role do you think the slim Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate could play in regard to President Trump's demand on slowing down migration and drugs coming into the United States in lieu of tariffs? And do you see the Republican Party being completely in sync with all of President Trump's demands to accomplish his goals of less drugs and less migration?
So I think principally, yes. Certainly on fentanyl and drugs, obviously we've just seen an explosion of fentanyl, and you can go to the smallest community in Texas and they will tell you about the deaths in their high schools and in their community. And I think this is a bipartisan area in Congress. And so I think you'll get near unanimous support there, and some of it bipartisan, depending upon the approach they take on the migration issue. Certainly, I think there's unanimous support for deporting those who create the most risk for the United States from the criminal standpoint, from a national security standpoint. I think those who've been adjudicated and have been required to move home and haven't seems to be from the new Department of Homeland Security, seems to be the top priority. Also, I think another big group, the 11 million migrants who've entered the U.S. under the previous administration. I don't know yet what the priority there, how they will tackle that. Certainly, they've made reassuring comments about doing that in a more structured and less disruptive way, but I don't know how that will work. I think raising the question of supply chains is important overall, certainly on what those migration levels will be in the United States. Ironically, creating disruption, very damaging disruption, supply chains actually works against U.S. interests and against President Trump's interest in finding allies who will help create better locations for essential products coming now from China. As you know, he's got a 4-year plan for eliminating essential products that come from China. Think steel, electronics, medicines and medical devices, critical minerals. There's an opportunity in the supply chain role that beyond even those elements, and we're seeing these discussions here in Houston right now. There are opportunities for assisting President Trump in his goal from Mexico, in Canada as well, but especially I think for Mexico, there's a role, a very positive role that could be played that could, I think, mitigate some of those harsher responses.
Let me ask a follow-up question real quick on that. The House is expected to hold, Republicans are expected to hold in the House a 2 to 3 seat majority.
It's a huge landslide there of majority.
How do you think Republicans in the House will operate on that slim majority? And can anything get done in the lower chamber? In retrospect, we will have 53 Republican votes in the Senate. Will that body serve as the adult in the room?
Well, they always think they are. So coming from the House, and there is a good balance here. Our constitutional architects were awfully wise in balancing out the urgency of the House and the more deliberation of the Senate. So it is a very thin majority. I think it will hold on tax reform issues. I think, but with some caveats. I think on trade, the president has a great deal of power to impose tariffs across the country. But if he is seeking a universal tariff against the globe, and the authority to do that, I think there'll be some challenges here. The two most likely authorities to do a universal tariff, both are flawed. One doesn't allow those universal tariffs to occur across all countries and all products. The other only allows it to be done for about 150 days. And that's why discussions are going on right now with Republicans in the House, where all tax provisions must start originate in the House about the authority to use broader-based tariffs, and including if their hope is to use some of it to offset the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So that thin majority will play a big role, I think, in any future authority, expansion of authority for the president, and play a role in the TCJA. But beyond that, I think it's going to be, that is a razor thin majority, very difficult. And so, but the president's imposing politically
Correct.
Right now. But
And he says he calls people at midnight.
he will call you all day long. Yes, he will call beyond that time too, by the way. I don't know when he sleeps. But yeah, I think Congress in the expansion of tariff authority will play an important role.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Chairman. A question for Juan Antonio. We've also seen a great deal of dialogue coming from Mexico regarding reforms to social programs. what do you think would be some good investment incentives that could attract new opportunities or businesses to them? And how would the social programs help or hurt such investments? Or is this just dead upon arrival given the reforms on those social programs?
Well, it's a very good question. I really don't know what could be done in the social area. Those are, I mean, you have to understand that for Morena, the main flag for doing many of the reforms is precisely the social programs. So they want to increase the way that they want to increase opportunities for poor people, for relegated sectors, and I think that will continue. At certain point, I think that the money will not be enough because of the budget constraints.
Yes.
Pemex, the petroleum company is demanding a lot of resources from the government, and also the Federal Electricity Commission, the electricity company. So I think that they will need at certain point some help. But I don't know if that help will come from Mexican companies or if they will open the investment to other companies from abroad. In any case, I think that it's a matter that will become more clear in the next years. How they will need help for social programs. I don't know if that was what you were asking, but that would be my sense of that.
Thank you. According to the Department of State, U.S. merchandise exports to Mexico increased from 42 billion in 1993, the year before NAFTA's entry into force, to 322 billion in 2023. The U.S. Department of Commerce data shows that the United States holds the largest stock of foreign direct investment, FDI, in Mexico, with a total of $144 billion in 2023. Mexican FDI in the United States stood at 38.3 billion that same year, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This question is for all three of you. What are some collaboration opportunities in which the U.S. and Mexico can align business and policy goals to strengthen supply chains across North America? And David, in specific, what are some things the state of Texas can do in order to see these opportunities come to fruition?
Sure. Yeah, so basically, I think that we are seeing a lot of benefit already from just our competitive advantage as a state. As one, our connection to Mexico is significant. And what I mean by that is basically out of the 47 ports that you mentioned earlier, 29 are just with Texas. So a lot of companies coming in and placing themselves on the Mexican side also, so in many cases, benefits Texas because they provide goods for the Texas side. As we move forward, there are already programs both at the federal level and at the state level that are looking to take advantage of new industries, and maybe maybe new is not the best point, but aerospace, for example,
Yes.
a thing that we all hear of SpaceX that's located in Brownsville. That's been a great economic driver. So the state of Texas has created a lot of economic incentives at a state level that provide and facilitate companies like SpaceX to grow in the state of Texas, for Tesla to move to Texas. I don't want to focus too much on Elon Musk companies, but those are like the sexiest examples that exist right now. So again, the Mexican side is also benefiting because a lot of the providers that they end up working with are on that side as well. So I think that we as a state benefit from the economic incentives that the state provides, but also for just the business-friendly environment that we have already fostered in Texas. So I mean, just based on that, we get a lot of interest of Mexican companies wanting to move as well into the state while they still have their own plants in Mexico. So yeah.
Thank you, David. Chairman Brady, the same question. What are some collaboration opportunities in which the U.S. and Mexico can align business and policy goals to strengthen supply chain?
Yeah, so at the outset, I sort of mentioned the four strikes, the four areas of tension between the Trump administration and Mexico. Those, the flip side, those also create, I think, ample opportunities to find common ground And in a process where we don't know yet how the incoming president might apply tariffs. Would he exempt some companies? Would he exempt some inputs like oil and manufacturing and issues like that? Free trading partners. There are ample opportunities for a Mexico and a Canada, for example, to find common ground. Some would say negotiate their way to a better situation, but I would say find common ground with the president here. Certainly, nearshoring China, it creates a great opportunity. You know, it's been 6 years since President Trump imposed the China tariffs. Many industries and businesses have moved some, and sometimes a lot of their supply chain out of China, but certainly not all. The president's going to create a lot of pressure for them to do that with a simple message. I warned you 6 years ago. You need to move those crucial supply chains out of there. There's going to be more pressure to do that. Mexico has the opportunity to be a key landing place for that, both logistically, from a labor standpoint. We know the NAFTA and now USMCA has created a dynamic, certainly over the years, where when you take the strengths of Mexico, US, and Canada together economically, it's allowed us to weather global recessions much better than other regions. Here, it sort of combines the strength to make all three more competitive, especially against China, some of our other foreign competitors. And so I think there is, again, as we look at Houston industries here, I think there's a great deal of attention and work being done on looking for stronger supply chains. I think the President Trump will finish with this, left his device would have everything that's ever been manufactured in the world made in the US. I think he understands as a business person that anchoring key industries and then having them run through reliable trading partners both is a good approach, but also makes prices lower, makes us more competitive. So yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities here from the broad range from energy to China to critical minerals. I think every region, our discussion at Aiken, certainly with other parts of the world, is that they're thinking too, you know, what's the niche area that we can help this president achieve some of his broader goals? And I think there are opportunities for the U.S. and Mexico to find those.
Thank you. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to add something because when you talk about collaboration and obviously the specific business, it's important, but something that's close to my heart, being a border kid, I was born in Eagle Pass, Texas, is border infrastructure. If we want to keep up with the growing economic trends that lead us into the future, that will lead us into the future, we need to make sure that the border infrastructure that connect the supply chains are able to keep up with that. And in that topic, it will take a public-private partnership on a binational level to make sure that we're fulfilling those needs. I think right now Texas is doing it has been working hard in engaging in border infrastructure development plans that engage with our Mexican stakeholders. Some people may not know that, but our Department of Transportation and our Secretary of State's office with the private sector work together with their counterparts on the Mexican side to come up with plans. Because you cannot, when you develop an international bridge, if you only have the American perspective, it's going to be a halfway bridge. You need the Mexican stakeholders at the table so that we can make sure that that infrastructure develops in the proper way. And when we talk about border infrastructure, it's not just the bridge that connects one city to the other, but the highways that create the connectivity for those bridges to have access to the interstate highways like 57 or 35 in the US. So again, just I'll finalize with that. Public-private partnerships on both sides of the border will be important to work together to address the infrastructure needs that will help us keep up with the supply chain growth, the economic growth that we experiencing.
Thank you. That was a great point.
And David, don't you think as well, and I agree with everything you said, but I think one of the elements of USMCA that hasn't been realized are commitments on both sides on trade facilitation, moving our products across the border safely, obviously, but more efficiently as well. Seems like there's opportunities there for both countries.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I don't mean to I see it as, I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, people might assume that there's already coordination between two sides of the bridge. Sometimes there's not.
Yeah.
So the more when we talk about implementation of the USMCA, we just don't talk about tariffs or things at the business sites, but also at the ground level of how can we make one clear example, unified cargo processing. Reducing the time that a cargo spends at a border crossing by doing the inspection of both Mexican and American on one side of the border. So stuff like this, ideas like that can improve, expedite, what's still keeping it safe, the trade relationship.
Juan Antonio.
So I just want to add along the same line. So we're focusing a lot on tariffs and all these things, and I think that it's the companies and the private sector who has the responsibility to bring to the table constructive matters in the discussion of the three governments. And I think one area that I have always thought that it's an important element that sometimes because of its technical nature, people don't speak about that, is regulatory cooperation.
Yep.
We have a long-standing homework to do there. Obviously, the USMCA contains a number of annexes to the technical barriers to trade chapter, the TBT chapter. But I think we need to go beyond and start to talk about common standards for cars, for electrical equipment, for many things, common regulations. I mean, we need to move into that direction if we really want to fight against unfair practices from China, for instance. It's not only tariffs. Tariffs at the end of the day, I think, at least in the Mexican case, sometimes it's they don't work because in the long run, people start to find ways to overcome those tariffs. But if you have a strong agenda on regulatory cooperation and the technical regulations and sanitary and phytosanitary measures applicable for the three countries are the same, that will ensure that nobody will get the advantage of being in the market and in the North American market without having to invest in this kind of requirements. So I think that's an area where the three countries, the three private sectors of the three countries can identify where to go beyond the tariffs discussion and the other discussion, and have a common agenda on trade facilitation, regulatory cooperation, alignment of the standards, things like that. The Europeans have been doing that for a long time, and I think it has worked for the common market. I think we can do that also in North America, and it will be a big change.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, I'm going to move on to USMCA 2026 review, but I wanted to ask you, David, can you share with us what role will the Texas Association of Business play regarding the potential tariffs threatened by President Trump? Are y'all organizing any letter write-in campaigns or outreach to the Trump-Vance incoming administration in the form of requesting meetings with the transition team to brief them on any of the negative impacts these tariffs could have on Texas businesses? And what can Texas businesses or businesses in general do to help any of the efforts that y'all have underway?
Yeah, so I'll use this to highlight that whatever we do, we try to bring a strong coalition of business individually and business associations with us. I mean, we think that as the Texas Chamber of Commerce, as Texas, we can lead in a lot of issues, but we don't want to come alone, right? We're going to bring a coalition. I say that to make the point that this coalition, it's important for us that whatever we do, whatever type of messaging that we present to administration, we also bring a binational coalition. And we have been very fortunate to, over the last 3 years or so, develop some very strong relationships with amazing leaders on the Mexican side, organizations like CONCAMIN, CCE, Index, at a regional level, CAINTRA, COMCE Noreste, COMCE Nacional. So because we are in communication with all these organizations, we have a deeper level understanding of how tariffs or any other challenge may affect the region. As we move forward, we want to bring these concerns from binational perspective. And I say this binational perspective because I go back to my point about halfway bridges. If we, I feel that it's a stronger point when you present how these things connect on both sides of the border. So if yes, we're talking to to this coalition of groups. We want to make sure that we're in communication with them to understand how this may hit in different areas. So, and as we have those conversations, we are definitely going to be in communication. We're in communication with people at different levels of government. Obviously, the President Trump is not there yet.
Yes.
So, but we want to be ready to have any type of conversation needed whenever with different levels of his leadership team to present our concerns and our messaging. Again, it's also about finding the right messaging to present, because I feel that at the end of the day, his team probably knows a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. So just identifying what will be the right messaging. One thing that comes to mind most often is the importance to the supply chain plays to the security component of the relationship. So we're trying to identify what are going to be like the main topics that we want to present on any conversations that we have. You talk about letters. Letters are always an option, but probably not the first thing to do. You know, you need to start with talking to people. I think that's better. In humble opinion, I think that's better to have a conversation as personal as possible. It's a better option as an initial starting position. So, but whenever we get there, we want to make sure that we do it knowing that we have brought as much information as broad of a group with us as possible.
Thank you, David. Moving on to the USMCA 2026 review, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement entered into force on July 1st, 2020. The USMCA supports mutually beneficial trade, leading to freer markets, fairer trade, and robust economic growth in North America. The agreement generates job opportunities, supports agriculture trade, incentivizes new investments in vital manufacturing industries, prohibits imports produced with forced labor, and includes important obligations regarding worker protections, the environment, and intellectual property rights. With all that said, the USMCA 2026 review is right around the corner. Talks will begin in earnest as soon as next year, if not earlier, and the importance of trade issues amongst the three countries could never be higher. Where do you see the USMCA 2026 review headed? What, if any, changes would you like to see in the review? And do you see the agreement ending completely or being allowed to continue? Who would like to go first? Juan Antonio.
Okay, so I was getting ready for that question since we decided to hold this panel. I think after giving a thought to the different scenarios, I would say that you can have, or my knowledge says that you can have 4 different outcomes as a result of the review. The first outcome is, and I think it's the best one for everybody, is that you have a limited review focusing on specific matters that can improve the relationship between the 3 countries and trying to address some of the issues, China, labor, some of the panels that we have already held, for instance, the GMO dispute, and that you bring together all that information and the commission makes, and the parties get together and make a recommendation to address those issues without reopening the agreement. That would be the best case scenario, I think, and that will imply that in 2026, we decide that the agreement is extended for another 16 years. The second scenario is that we reopen the agreement. So we hold a negotiation on the agreement and we focus on certain aspects, especially addressing some of the US concerns, but perhaps with the opportunity of Mexico and Canada to bring some issues to the table and try to improve the agreement and then renew it with modifications or amendments in 2026. That will be second best, because I think that if you reopen the agreement for negotiations, then you have the risk that those negotiations will not end in a correct way or in a specific point, and then you miss the opportunity to renew the agreement in 2026. And that would be the third scenario. The third scenario is that we have so many contentious issues and we have so many discussions and some parallel matters happening that in 2026 is impossible to decide or to get a recommendation to the Commission on the renewal. And that will imply that the agreement will have to be reviewed every year afterwards, no, until 2036. That's actually where I think everybody is thinking that the things will happen, will arrive. It's important to know that if that would be the scenario, then so you must have in mind some dates. 2027 is we will hold middle term elections in Mexico, so that will imply probably that there may be changes in the Congress relationship with the President Sheinbaum. Then President Trump will leave in 2029, and that will imply that still we'll have 7 more years to actually get together and try to renew the agreement for other 16 years. So what I'm trying also to bring to the table is that this idea of the agreement to be finalized, it's only the fourth scenario. The fourth scenario is that the things get so crazy and that so many issues come into play that one of the countries decides to invoke Article 34.6, which is withdrawal from the agreement. And then after the notification, 6 months later, the agreement will end for that party. By the way, Canada has been saying, we want to kick Mexico out of the agreement. That's not possible. They can get out of the agreement if they want and negotiate bilaterally with the US, but that's not. But within the USMCA, that's not an option. So those would be for me the possible scenarios and the possible scenarios that we need to be prepared for. I would personally like the first one, but I think that we will need to be ready for the third one.
Thank you. David, let me go back to the question. USMCA 2026 review is right around the corner. Talks will begin in earnest as soon as next year, if not earlier. Where do we see the USMCA review headed? What, if any, changes would you like to see in the review? And do you see the agreement ending completely or being allowed to continue?
I think it's and again, just speaking from a chamber private sector perspective, we shouldn't let the agreement. We should advocate for the continuation of the agreement in any form that the 3 countries allow. I commend the efforts that the private sector on Canada, US, and Mexico have done to be always in the cuarto de junto on the room next door, trying to advocate for issues or that make trade and commerce between in the region better. The agreement makes the region strong. I think that with the agreement, North America can be the #1 economic region in the world. So we need to advocate for it in whatever shape, way, or form that it survives. We need to be advocating for that. We are doing our best as a private sector to unite, obviously as a Texas being a subnational level, but the Texas chamber, we think that we want to be play a role in getting together with all of the other leadership of the private sector to advocate for this. How we want to do it? Well, we obviously having a message, a united message between all of us, meaning Mexico, Texas, US, and Canada. And yes, I'm sure there's ways that the agreement can improve. I don't want to head on myself because I know I want to speak for my members too as to like which areas, but there are areas for sure. One that comes to mind as an example is how can we improve labor mobility between the 2 countries? If not immigration reform, at least labor mobility to address some of the labor shortages in different areas in our region. But working together between the different stakeholders groups and respectfully communicating the need to keep this agreement to our government leadership, I think that's the best we can do to, in whatever way that this agreement survives, make sure that that's still there to keep making our region stronger.
Thank you. Chairman Brady, any thoughts from you?
So I think it's incredibly important that we preserve the agreement and build upon it. I think Juan Antonio is correct. I think Mexico and Canada would prefer a pretty limited review of it. I think we all recognize that this will likely be, from America's standpoint, President Trump's standpoint, a full-on renegotiation. In looking at areas such as energy, ag, biotech, autos, content, issues like that. I think part of that's born from the fact that this had historical level of support in Congress. And I've worked on a lot of trade agreements and I've counted noses for a lot of them. And this was remarkable because it was so balanced and it included some of the Democrat priorities on environment and labor that frankly they dreamed about for more than a decade and hadn't even sniffed at it in negotiations. And suddenly it was there with the coordination, the negotiation with Ambassador Lighthizer and Democrats, certainly on the Ways and Means Committee. I saw Chairman Neal and then Speaker Pelosi engage in major ways. So, but a lot has changed since then. COVID has changed a lot of viewpoints. China's super aggressiveness changing even more viewpoints. The point being, I think there is an opportunity to modernize this agreement, and really based on the foundation of NAFTA to begin with, when it was signed 33 years ago or so, led by our hometown president George H.W. Bush. The whole goal was to take the strengths of each three countries, meld them together so all three were stronger, both economically, culturally, and are competitively across the world. And it's worked in that regard. There's an opportunity now with supply chain issues, with reliability issues. There's an opportunity to upgrade this, I think, or modernize it even more and make it more important to these times. I think from the U.S. perspective, because the Biden administration, really focused on enforcement of labor in a big way, the rapid response system, the elements within the USMCA, environment and labor got a lot of attention. I think it's broadly felt by Republicans that our priorities on energy and ag were left unenforced. And as you know, if you ever want to do a future trade agreement, you have to have shown that you enforced equally the elements of past agreements. So I think it's going to be very important that there be some progress made in those regards. So I would say, if you ask me today, and I think Juan Antonio really laid out those four options, I would shade it toward continuation, but it's not guaranteed. And I think frankly, Texas, the business, the ag, the manufacturing tech communities, which see firsthand the impact of this agreement, I think will play an important role in this going forward. So thank you. You have in the past. Appreciate TAB's leadership again in that area. But yeah, it depends on how effective and persuasive we are in laying out both the positives of it and the damage from not continuing it.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and move to our question and answer session from those in attendance. I'll first open up for a question and answer session from participants here. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask any of our panelists, or a statement that you would like to make about what we've been talking about for the last hour? Yes, Steve Coe.
Yeah. So I'm just curious from your view that this panel is really good and it's very balanced, but it still makes me very nervous, right, about the future. How devastating do you think it will be to not continue short term and long term, from all of your point of views, from the United States, Mr. Brady, for Texas, long and short term, or can we all survive? Can we still remain competitive each on our own?
I think it'd be incredibly damaging to not preserve this agreement and to continue it forward. And I hope that's absolutely the last option. I think, look, just the imposition of 25% tariffs are estimated to cost 400,000 jobs in the US alone. So imagine no agreement at all. The truth is, we do better when we meld our strengths, and I think it's going to be really contingent upon members of Congress and the business, ag, tech community to be making those arguments persuasively, and they can, in my view. But yeah, I think I would predict you will hear that threat, some point in those conversations, and it won't be an idle one. Nonetheless, I'm hopeful that we have a tri-national effort, among economic leaders and Main Street businesses and farmers in the US who make the case persuasively to preserve that agreement.
David?
Yeah, it will be extremely disruptive and problematic for the business community. I think it will be about I want to get back to the messaging, like what messaging do we present as we're trying to present the why we need to keep the agreement. And one of the things that comes up more often is the supply chain and how it keeps our security. I go back to 2020. I was still at the Secretary of State's office, and we were dealing with the different companies having different levels of activity based on protocols of health. And sometimes their protocols level didn't allow for the company in Texas that they were providing to keep functioning at all. So my point is saying, like, if a company in Mexico, we don't know how already connected we are with Mexican companies. Then you talk about nearshoring, and we talk about as far as like, oh, it's something that's happening just now or happening in the future. No, we're already connected now. So I think that we just need to talk about and highlight how dependent we are in certain areas of the agreement to facilitate those trade relationships that, again, are part of our security. And when I talk about security, it's just when I say it's security, I'm actually just referring to the regular activity of commerce in the state. So we just need to develop the right messaging to present to our leadership and just advocate for it. The one thing that I will say is, and I know it sounds obvious, but we just have to be very present. It just cannot be a one-time thing. We just have to be very present in advocating for that. It's not just a one-day advocacy day, perhaps. It's going to be like a 4-year activity of just making sure that we are reminding everyone, but generally, of the importance of the agreement and the need that we have for it.
Juan Antonio?
So I think for Mexico, it would be devastating. I don't think that anybody that has a correct understanding of things would think that Mexico could actually live without an agreement as we know Mexico right now. I think the out of the 3 countries, I think that Mexico would be the most damaged if the agreement will finalize. Mainly because not only the economical point is important, but because of the ideological and geopolitical consequences that this will have for Mexico. Mexico will need to move back to what we were before the agreement was enacted. Some sort of not ally, playing with the. I mean, I always like to remember that the Germans during the Second World War sent a letter to Mexico saying that if Mexico will join the Germans, actually it was the First World War, if Mexico will join the Germans in the war, they will give back Texas, New Mexico, California, to Mexico. I'm just saying that because
those are fighting words.
yeah, I mean those things are still there somehow, no? And I think that the switch from being, a pro-free trade, a pro-democracy country, and we are looking at some of those things already coming in this government, no? Those feelings, those considerations will become more clear, more evident if Mexico will be dropped from the USMCA. So I think for many, it will be the end of the country as we know it. Obviously, Mexico will remain there, and probably it will find some ways to develop, but I don't think that it will look like anything like we've seen in the last 30 years.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from those here present? I can go ahead and open it up now to questions for those participating virtually online. Does anyone have a question?
At this time, there are no questions on the webinar right now.
I'll go ahead and ask anyone that's on the webinar, if they would like to ask a question. This is the time to do that. We'll give it 20 seconds. Oh, yes, Devin.
Jose, in the meantime, while we're waiting for questions online, just piggybacking off of what Steve said, let's say we find ourselves in an unfortunate situation. Goes away. What do you think the sort of next steps look like? Is there room for a bilateral negotiation? Canada aside, do you think that what would that sort of economic landscape look?
Who would like to go first? Juan Antonio.
Perhaps, yeah. So the idea of losing the U.S. as a trading partner has been there for some time already. Like many governments in the past have thought that to depend so much on the U.S. And Canada's markets, it was not safe, from a geopolitical perspective. So that was mainly the reason that Mexico started to negotiate so many trade agreements with other regions. The truth is that even when that was the trade policy of many governments, the impact of those agreements in our exports is not very high. So we keep, and every time more, we keep depending on the North American markets. So for instance, when Canada is saying, well, let's just drop the whole USMCA away, or let's kick out Mexico. Well, they don't remember that we have the CPTPP, and Canada is a party and Mexico is a party. So we're still, even if USMCA ends, CPTPP is still there. We have the Pacific Alliance Agreement. We have an agreement with the European Union. We have agreements now with EFTA countries and with many other regions in the world. We have an agreement with Israel, for instance. So we have 13 FTAs with more than 50 countries. So in that regard, I think that we would have to use those agreements if this agreement will end. But I think that reality is that Mexico will always want to have an agreement with the US. So yes, a bilateral, if that's what it takes, I think that it will be a potential way out for an ending of USMCA. And that's my feeling.
Thank you. Any comments from the other panelists?
It's a troubling question. I hope we never have to answer, would be the short answer. Look, this is this relationship is incredibly beneficial to the U.S. We are a large part of the world economy, 1/4, but not all of it. And our competitors in China, our allies in Japan, our competitors in Europe understand we are not the only market. And our relationship with Canada and Mexico, while it's had its disputes, all of them do, are proven time and time again, both to benefit us economically, but allow us to compete better on the world stage. And I think it would be very damaging for the U.S. to end this agreement and go the bilateral route.
Thank you. I'll ask one more time if there's any questions online. If not, I'll move on to the closing remarks.
We do have a couple questions online.
Oh, good. Let's go ahead. Can you read the first one out?
Sure. The first question from Luis Mosquis. How does business invest on either sides of the border without any certainty of the duty environment, the technology required to be competitive?
Who would like to go first?
I think the answer is fairly self-apparent. You know, that business uncertainty restricts investment, especially the long-term, the major investment you need. If you don't know what those duties and tariffs are going to be, or if there's going to be a positive investment environment with efficient facilitation. If that's changing year to year, I think it certainly damages investment, foreign direct investment in the type, whether it's infrastructure, technology, manufacturing, nearshoring, all of that requires that business certainty, and it works against it.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to address that?
I think it goes back to the regulatory alignment that we were talking about a little earlier. I think just advocating for all parts of the international relation to have the similar standards for trade. And I think that's something, again, that the agreement helps to have. So just keep reinforcing the need for that as much as possible.
Thank you. Juan Antonio?
If I understood correctly the question, so I think that yes, the level of uncertainty that we are facing right now is not going to help new investments, and that's clear. At least not from U.S. companies. Probably they will keep investments that they have, and they will probably increase in some way some of the investments that are necessary to continue operations. I mean, we're a big market also. We're 130 million that deserve sometimes the development of the own internal market, in Mexico. But in general terms, I would understand that the situation, both created by the Mexican government and now the uncertainty that we are facing because of the incoming government in the U.S., is creating this uncertainty. I think our job as North American believers is to try to solve these matters as soon as possible, to sit in the table and be constructive, and to be able to celebrate in 2026 not only the continuation of USMCA, but also the World Cup. And I hope that
Most importantly,
I hope either the US or Mexico, not Canada, no, I'm joking, no, hope one of them will win the World Cup.
thank you. Do we have other questions from the audience online?
Yes, there's one other question that I will trying to read appropriately, but I think the question they're asking in case the 25% tariff takes effect, how would U.S. industries ask for waivers, and how long would it take to obtain? The question's from Paul Osa, and if you're available online to clarify your questions, happy to allow you to talk to do so.
So that's the question, 25% tariff. Is there a way to get a waiver on that?
So I'll jump in here and with not good news, because we worked on the exclusion process, both for the steel and aluminum, the China tariffs as well, and the exemption, country by country exemption as well. I don't see that occurring again. I think the Trump administration will be very clear that the exemptions we made in the past were contingent upon your moving your supply chains to the U.S. or to reliable trading partners. It's your problem if you didn't. I think there'll be far less openness from the Trump administration to an exclusion or exemption process. I think dramatically less interest in the new administration to that exclusion process.
Thank you, Chairman Brady. Anyone else would like to comment on that? Great. Was that the last question we had?
Yes.
Such an uplifting question to finish on.
Thank you. It's time to wrap this up. First, thanks to our panelists, Congressman Brady, Chairman Brady, Juan Antonio and David, your knowledge and insights today are of much value as businesses throughout this country and in Mexico and around the world navigate this delicate balance of trade and investments after the most recent elections in both countries. We leave this room with important information and perspectives about the way forward for both the US and Mexico. These will be an interesting 4 years in the United States with President Trump at the helm of government in this country and a Republican-controlled House and Senate. He will wield great influence over trade matters affecting North America and other parts of the world. President Trump will go down as one of the greatest comeback stories in American history, given his reelection non-consecutively. But by the same token, these next 6 years in Mexico under President Sheinbaum will also be marked with important milestones regarding trade and how she deals with the issues of migration, drugs, and social reforms in her country, as well as how she deals with President Trump. As the first woman president of her country, she will undoubtedly leave a lasting mark for centuries to come. Also, it sounds like all of y'all are hopeful of the USMCA 2026 review with potential to grow trade amongst the countries in the agreement once we weather this tariff threat. Given the more than 200-year diplomatic history between Mexico and the United States and the millions of people that live on both sides of the border region, a healthy trade relationship between these countries is key for the success of the North American region. I should also warn, though, that any erosion of the USMCA or regional cooperation will be devastating both in the short term and the long term for not just Mexico, but also Canada and the United States. No country can go at it alone, and no country can alone compete with the rest of the world, especially as the rest of the world is building their own regional unions with their neighbors. Sharing of resources and supply chains will be important for growth. Comparative advantages must be utilized. Protectionism can be the end of any country. And with that, as always, know that Aiken and Dorantes advisors are well positioned to advise current clients and prospective clients on how to best navigate the US-Mexico relation, as well as trade and investment issues in both countries. I encourage all who joined us today to follow up with myself or any of the panelists here so we can connect with you and answer more pertinent questions you may have, or just continue the dialogue on this important matter. In addition, we will be posting this video on our website for all to have access and watch it. Thank you all so much for participating.